Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Kalayim. We are starting today Pedig Dalid Halacha Aleph. We are learning Daf Lamed Hey. We are on Daf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, in the middle of the Amid, right, beginning with the chapter of Korachas HaKerem. So a few words of introduction, and actually we already touched upon these points in the end, towards the end of the previous chapter, and that is number one, that grains or greens must be distanced from grape vines. In other words, individual vines, 6 tvachim. And if you have a vineyard, a kerem, as will be defined a little bit later, machlekes b'shamai and Beis Hillel, we already quoted various times the opinion of Beis Hillel that the definition of a kerem is when you have at least 2 rows. One row is comprised of 3 vines. The other one could even only be comprised of 2 vines. But the 5 are in 2 rows. Then and only then is that going to be defined as a kerem. And when you have a kerem, the distance between whether grains or greens have to be 4 amos. Now, whether you need the distance of 6 tvachim, whether you need the distance of 4 amos, both of them are there for avodah. Avodah means that people have to work the vine or people have to work the vineyard, and you need to have a certain amount of space around these plants for you to be able to do the work that it needs. If you have individual vines, the work that was done was manual work. For manual labor, 6 tvachim is enough. When you have a vineyard for which people would have an ox and they would have a wagon and they would have various implements, right? Because they were doing a lot more. For that, you have to have 4 amos. But the idea is the same: is that you need to leave the space needed for the avodah of the kerem, for you then to be able to plant something beyond that space, and for it not to be considered mixed up, taroivist with, kalayim with the kerem. Okay, now the Mishnah, like Rabbeinu HaKadosh doesn't begin from the beginning, it begins from the middle. Rabbi begins the topic of Kilei HaKerem by discussing 2 cases. One case is called Korachas HaKerem. The word Korachas means a clearing of a vineyard. A clearing of a vineyard would mean that in middle of a kerem, a gap was made. There was a clearing out of the vines in middle of the kerem. And the question is, how big does the clearing have to be? How large does the bald spot have to be for one to be allowed to plant inside that bald spot, and for that area to be considered a distinct field? And we'll see for that the machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. That's Korachas HaKerem. The second case in the Mishnah will be a case called Mechoil HaKerem, the perimeter of a kerem. Now, it was common that people would surround a vineyard with a wall, but the vines would not be planted all the way up to the wall. They would normally leave, let's say, 4 amos of empty space. As we explained, you need to have 4 amos in order to be able to bring the implements that are used to work with the vineyard. That has to be emptied out space. There is also people that would leave some area. No, don't take that out. Take that out. Don't put that yet. Some area near the wall would be left empty for people to be walking on that area to make the earth harder, which would therefore strengthen the longevity of the wall. But there was normally an empty space between the vineyard and the yard, and the wall that surrounded the vineyard. That empty space is called a mechoil hakerem. And here also the question that the Mishnah will be addressing is, how large, what's the minimum width of the mechoil hakerem that would allow someone to plant somewhere inside the mechoil hakerem, greens or grains, and that will not be considered kilei hakerem, as we'll see both in Korachas HaKerem and in Mechoil HaKerem, that the general rule of 4 amos will not be enough. Normally the rule is, you want to plant next to a vineyard. If it's a vineyard, if it's a kerem, okay, leave 4 amos empty, and beyond that you can plant what you want. We don't say that if you are planting in the patch, in the cleared area in middle. We don't say that if you're planting between the kerem and the wall. And finally, the topic of the Mishnah is a topic that we actually learned in the previous chapters, Benegea Kilei Zerayim, and that is that if you have a halachic geder, if you have a fence, if you have a wall, as defined by its height of it being minimally 10 tfachim, then you are allowed to plant a kedem all the way up to the wall on one side, and immediately on the other side of this geder, you can plant other seeds, even though you do not have the 4 ames of generally prerequisite empty space. That's the din of a geder. These are basically the 3 dinim of the Mishnah. In the Gemara, we're going to have a Rabbi Yosi that will qualify the stringency of the Mishnah concerning karachas hakeren, as we'll see, that there has to be a huge bald spot for you to be allowed to plant inside of it. That's only if after you have the bald spot, you have at least flanked on 2 sides of the bald spot halachic keren. Certainly if it's flanked by 3 sides. Certainly if it's flanked by all 4 sides. As we'll see when we learn at the end of today's daf, we'll go into a braisa. We'll see how far we can maybe even get into daf lamed vav. But if you don't even have from 2 sides a keren, so there was a vineyard and you emptied out a space in the middle, and now from what remains after you emptied out the space in the middle, halachically you only have a keren on one side. What you have on the other 3 sides are so little that it's no longer considered the minimum size of a kerem. It will not be included in the din of karachas hakerem, as we will see when we learn the sugya. This is a kitzur of daf lamed hey, and now, without any further ado, Chavre, with great joy, we are starting now the 4th chapter, and we will actually have various parakim going forward that will be moving on to the halacha of kilei hakerem, planting, the prohibition of planting whether grains or greens in the close proximity of a vineyard. Says the Mishnah, Korachas hakerem, like we explained in the words of introduction, you have a vineyard. And we're going to follow the definition of Beis Hillel. A vineyard is defined by you having minimally 2 rows. And they have, each row has in it minimally 3, and the other one 2 vines. Now, obviously, if you only had that minimum size kerem kevan, there's nothing to clear out. If you clear that out, there's nothing. We're speaking about someone who had many more than these 2 rows, as the Gemara will begin to define. And one might have thought that, could you plant inside that bald spot? Well, is there 4 ames? One would say, well, if I'm putting something in the middle, and it's beyond 4 amas from either direction, from the kerem, from the surrounding kerem, you might have thought it's okay. Says the Mishnah, no, it's not okay. You have to have a much larger shear than the 4 amas. And what is that? Beishama yoimrim, the width of the gap separating the right side and the left side of the kerem has to have at least esrim ba'arba amos, 24 amos. Now, how do we get to 24 amos? Given here, if you can please put up the picture according to Beis Shammai, and whoever's using an art scroll, it's the picture to the right. So the picture, first of all, is depicting a gap in middle of a vineyard. There's nothing to the right, there's nothing to the left, and that's done on purpose. Obviously, the halacha will apply for sure if you have also to the right and to the left. But even when you only have flanking the gap, 2 kerems, right, one on the top and one on the bottom, let's say one in the north and one in the south, you have to have already 24 amos. So let's go. If you look at the remaining kerem to the top, first of all, that's a vadai. You have to have 4 amos space, the avoid the space in which you can't plant anything. That's normal. If you look to the kerem in the bottom, right, the kerem in the south, you have to have from it going up 4 amos of empty avoid the space, obviously, like the rule by any other kerem. But here we want to say something like this, that the area in the middle, being that you have a kerem on the top and the kerem on the bottom, we're going to go through 2 steps. Step number 1 is that the area in the middle, which according to Beis Shammai must have at least 16 amas. How do we get to the number 16 amas? Because one might divide the middle of the area into two. Why would I divide it in my mind into two? Because since when you made this clearing, you have on the top remaining kedem and in the bottom remaining kedem. So if you're going to plant something in the middle, the person's eye might also divide it into a top and into a bottom. So that's step number one. Now, so we view the area in the middle not as a 16 amma area, but we view it as two 8 ammas areas. Says Beis Shammai that you have to have an area large enough of 8 ammas, for it to be distinct enough for one not to mix it up with the kedem on the top and the kedem on the bottom. What's amazing is that the 4 ammas, both to the north and to the south, are not part. They're not part because they are needed regardless. But in between the work area of the top and the work area of the bottom, theoretically, Beis Shammai, you would only need to have 8 ammas. But 8 ammas would not be enough, because since you have a kedem to the top and a kedem in the bottom, we are going to make what he's calling here the farmable area also into a 2-part field. A field that's divided into half, and every half has to have 8 ammas. 8 and 8 is 16. So if you add it all up together, you have 4 ammas if we're going north to south. The 8 ammas of the work area that has to be left empty, kehil chois, any kalayim from a kedem, you have to have 4 ammas empty. Now you have the middle 8 and 8, that's 16. So we're up to 20. Then you have to have another 4 ammas of empty space, right, for the kedem in the bottom. So that's a total of 24 ammas. In other words, if you have 24 ammas or more, then you take the middle 16 ammas or more, whatever the size is, as long as you still have 4 to the top and 4 to the bottom for the work area, and in there you can plant. Masha'enken, according to Beis Shammai, if you have, let's say, 23 ammas, so you have enough space to leave 4 ammas on the top, and you have enough space to leave 4 ammas on the bottom, but you only have 15 ammas space now in the middle. 15 ammas divided into half is 7.5 and 7.5. We do not allow you to plant anything in the middle. Now you see the stringency of the Korachas HaKedem. Normally, all you need to have is 4 ammas. Here you have to have 24 ammas. Now, Beis Hillel agrees with Beis Shammai with the concept that the area that's in the middle of now to the north of Kedem, to the south of Kedem, also has to be an area that you will allow your mind to divide into 2. Beis Hillel holds that any 4 amma area is considered a distinct area for itself. So we are looking not only to distance the farmable area 4 ammas from the kedem, we're looking for it to be considered a makim chashuv b'fnei atzmai. Beis Hillel, 4 ammas is enough. Here again, we need to double that. Okay, so you have to have 8 ammas of farmable area. Now add it all up together. 4 ammas to the top, the 8 ammas of the farmable area, another 4 ammas of the empty avoida area. So now you have a 16 amma total. Now we'll read it inside. That no, he's more lenient. 4 ammas is not enough. 8 ammas is not enough. Okay, Abed, what do you need to have? You need to have 16. Gewaldig. Okay, so that the underlying machloikas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel by Korachas HaKedem is how many ammas are needed for that area to be deemed a distinct field. That's the nekuda, and you have to remember that. LeBeis Shammai, a distinct field, 8 ammas. LeBeis Hillel, 4 ammas. And based on that, as we explained, you have the total of either 24 or of 16. So that was case number 1. Now the Mishnah continues with case number 2. Mechoil hakerem. The word mechoil means a circle, right? As we have at the end of Masechtos Utzin, right? That at the end, Asar HaKadosh Baruch Hu laso is mechoil litzadikim, or that when we have a Masechta Tainus, right? Tu B'Av, that they would dance in a circle. But the circle that we are talking about is the commonly opened area that was left around a kedem, that encircled a kedem, between the kedem, leaving a space between the kedem and the wall around it. In other words, a couple of steps, just the way they did it. People fenced off their vineyards. It wasn't hefker to open. But they didn't build the wall all the way up until the outermost vines. Why not? because you have to work those vines. When you work with the vines, if it's a vineyard, you would take an ox, you would take a wagon, you would take implements, and the normal area that you need was 4 amos. Kevin, you with me? So normally, just if you can just imagine, you have a kedem. It doesn't matter if it's a square or a circle. It's not about the shape. It's about the concept. And around it, there would be an open area, avoida, and around that empty area, there would be a wall. Now, could you plant in that open area? Well, if the open area only has the minimum 4 amos, of course not. You can't plant within 4 amos of a kedem. But you would have thought that if you have a mechoil that's wider than 4 amos, let's say if it's 5 amos, you would think, okay, so the outermost amma, I can plant whatever I want. No, you can't. Because since this circle is flanked from the inside by the kedem, from the outside by a wall, it's not open area. The same idea that we had by korachas hakedem with different numbers, the same idea will be needed by mechoil hakedem. There has to be enough open space in this mechoil for one to be able to say that if I'm planting in it, the observer will view that space as a place for itself, as a distinct field. As a distinct field, you can plant aside of you having the 4 amos that is obviously necessary. So what is now the minimum size? Now we're going to take it down a notch. It's going to be less than by the korachas hakedem. Beishama yoimrim sheish esrei amo. Now, if you can please show a picture for that. Well, how do we get to the 16 amma? So take a look. Take a look inside the picture. So here you see in the bottom, in the south, you have the kedem, and you're always going to see a depiction that has 2 rows or more. Because if you don't have 2 rows, I know lebeshama you don't need it, but we're going with you need to have 2 rows. Then the b'chal is not a kedem. Then you have the normal 4 amos work area. Now what we have is something else which is amazing, is that we want for there to be 4 amos adjacent to the wall. Why do you want to have 4 amos adjacent to the wall? First of all, it was common for people to leave a passageway around the wall for people to be able to walk. And furthermore, like we mentioned in the introduction, that it was advantageous to the longevity of the wall for people to walk dafka right near it, farvas, because when people trample on the earth, they harden it. And the harder the earth is adjacent to the wall, the stronger is the wall affixed in the ground. So you need to have 4 amos for the wall. Now, what did we learn before, according to Beis Hillel, that the minimum width of an area for it to be considered an area distinct by itself, according to Beis Shammai, 8 amos. According to Beis Hillel, 4 amos. In the first case of the Mishnah, cave and halkop, since you had a vineyard in the north and a vineyard in the south, we needed for the farmable area to be an area that theoretically you're dividing into half. Because when a person takes a look and they see kedem in the north, kedem in the south, you want to be able to have that mirrored in the farmable area, the northern of the farmable and the southern of the farmable. So therefore, the middle area, when it's flanked by both sides by kedem, according to Beis Shammai, that the minimum width is 8 amos, has to be doubled, 16. According to Beis Hillel, the minimum is 4. To be doubled, you have to have 8. Over here, you don't have to double anything. Over here, you're going to the raw number. LeBeis Shammai, the area that will be enough for you to consider it distinct is 8 amos. LeBeis Hillel, how much area do you need of land for you to consider it distinct? 4 amos. Amachayim. So therefore, LeBeis Shammai, you have to have 8 amos of farmable area. But in addition to the 8 amos, you have to have 4 amos away from the kedem, the normal distance. You have to have another 4 amos away from the wall. So if you add it all up together, you have a 16. That's the 16 LeBeis Shammai. According to Beis Hillel, the 4 amos and the 4 amos are the same. 4 amos away from the kedem is universal. 4 amos needed as a passageway around the wall is universal. According to Beis Hillel, all you need to have for an area to be considered large enough for it to be distinct is 4 amos. Good. So you have 4 amos in the middle. So you have 4 and 4 and 4, you have a total of 12. And that's the Beis Shammai says, Sheish Esrei, uBeis Hillel Oimim, Shteim Esrei amos. So it's Gavaldik. So there's a
Rabbi,
lot.
the four amos next to the wall, that's not a halachic requirement, that's a practical requirement, right?
Well, let me add to that. Because of people's practical designation, of the 4 amas near the wall to be left empty, if you will not do that, and you will decide to move the farmable area, all the way up until the wall, the observer won't consider the farmable area as a distinct area. He won't look at it that way. He's going to see it somehow an area subservient to the vineyard, even though you have 4 amas or more away from the vineyard, because it's between the vineyard and the wall. That area is considered part of the vineyard. You want to make that area, no, not part of the vineyard. It's a makom b'fnei atzma. It's its own place. It's its own farmable area. So then you have to make it chashuv. The more you encroach on that space, the less an observer will see it as a distinct area. Ido, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, very good. And now the Mishnah says what we spoke out by heart, because this is extremely important. Korachas hakerem versus Mechayel hakerem. Mechayel hakerem is an area that's flanked only by one side with kerem. Korachas hakerem has to be minimally flanked by 2 sides. Of course, if it's flanked by 3 sides. Of course, if it's flanked by all of the 4 sides, but it has to at least be sandwiched in between 2 sides. You have a vineyard that was destroyed in the middle. Gemaldik. And guys, we're going to have in the Gemara today, and we'll see how far we get into the Braisa, all of the different configurations where it's flanked by 2 sides, 3 sides, and 4 sides. And therefore, let's turn in our pagination to Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis. Continues the Mishnah that im ein sham shes esrei. If you don't have 16 amas, guys, this is according to Beis Hillel, right? How do you get to 16? 4 in the top, 4 in the bottom, and 8 in between. Why do we have 8? Really, you only need 4, but we have to double it. Then you may not introduce any other seed if it's, like you said, 15 amas. So really, if it's 16 minus whatever. However, if you do have 16, then you can't plant wherever you want in the 16. You have to leave distant from the top kedem 4. You have to leave distant from the bottom kedem 4. That means you'll only have dafka the middle. And there, the middle, the Beis Hillel will be 8. And that's where Zereya asks Hamoiser. And the same idea would be according to Beis Shammai with the number 24. So that's Korachas HaKerem. The Eizehu. B'choil HaKerem. B'choil HaKerem, what's the perimeter of the Kerem? That's not that you have an area between 2 vineyards. No, it's on one side you're flanked by a vineyard, and the other side you're flanked by a wall. Ben Kerem legeder. And here again, we're going Beis Hillel, that im ein sham shtei mesvei Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai you have to have 16, but according to Beis Hillel you only have to have 12. If you don't have 12, even though you would argue, so what? I'm going to be away. I have a work area. I have a passageway, right? So I'm going to farm in, 3 amas. If I only have, let's say, 11 amas, you can't do that because the farmable area itself has a minimum. Beis Hillel 4 amas. If you have the 12, then where do you plant in the 12? Not wherever you want. There always has to be this consistency. You're going to leave in the top the 4 amas.
Which part is the perimeter that you're talking about?
The perimeter, if you take a look at the picture then, do you see the picture? So you don't see the picture. Right now it's on the Zoom. The perimeter is between the edge of the vineyard and the wall. Within the wall area. Okay. Then, okay. That is the Mishnah. Now hold on. Before we get into the din, the third din of the Mishnah of a geded, we're going to have now a machlekes tanoim. Says the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, that what you mentioned, the mechoil hakerem, is not the case. We all heard going back to Moshe Rabbeinu, there is a law of korachas hakerem. We learned that there is another din of mechoil hakerem. And let's go with Beis Hillel, right? That God told Moshe Rabbeinu, by korachas hakerem you have to have 16. By mechoil hakerem you have to have the 4, 4, and 12. Okay, but what is the case? Not the case that you just mentioned. The case that you mentioned is called Geder HaKerem. And what's amazing is what Rabbi Yehuda is saying is that, and that really goes to what Ido was what bothered him, that when you have a vineyard and it's surrounded by a wall, as long as you're planting something away from the vines 4 amas, I don't care if it's an amma close to the wall. I don't care if it's all the way up to the wall. You got no problem. You distanced the grains / greens or whatever else you're planting. You distanced it away from the vineyard 4 amas. So you're good. In other words, the case that you gave, which will be called, according to the Tana Rabbi Yehuda, Geder HaKerem, a fenced vineyard, there are no special stringencies. You only need to do what you always need to do. If whatever you're planting is 4 amas away, in other words, it's beyond 4 amas, then you're good. The Eizehu Mechoil HaKerem, but what is this din of Mechoil HaKerem? That Lebesil, you have to have the 12 amas. That is ben shtei keramim. That is when you have an empty area between 2 vineyards. Now, the Gemara will explain then why would you not need to have 16? But appreciate that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the only time you have a special stringency is that if you are planting in an area that is flanked by 2 sides or more with vineyard. Since whoever's looking, whether it's to the right or to the left, or in the pictures we had it to the top and the bottom, north, south, whatever, if you see a vineyard flanking this area that you're planting in from both sides, that is where we have chumras. But if you have a vineyard, open area, and wall, there is no unique din. Now you have to leave space. How much space? From a vineyard, you have to have 4 amas of empty space, and anything beyond the 4 amas is enough. So if you have a 5 amma area between the vineyard and the wall, the outermost 1 amma can be planted according to the Tana Rabbi Yehuda. Beautiful. And again, the Gemara will go into greater detail. Why is it that if you're making a bold spot in a kerem, even in a way where it's only flanked by 2 sides, where you have to have 16 amas. If you have it between 2 vineyards, you only have to have 12 amas. Why? We'll get that in the Gemara. Now, the final din in the Mishnah, there's a din of a gadar. It's amazing the way Rabbi wrote it. The gadar is a given. A gadar means, like we learned in the previous chapter by Kilei Zeroim, now we're learning Kilei Akerem, that if you have a wall, you don't need to leave any distance. You know what? Even if the wall is paper thin, today with technology, you can mamash have that. You can have sturdy walls. 10 tefachim is not that much. If it's thin, a millimeter, I can plant the vineyard all the way up to one side of the wall, and immediately on the other side of the wall, I can plant anything that I want. Why? Because the wall is separating it. So what's the criteria of a wall? It's not about the width. It's only about the height. And what's the height? The standard height of a halachic wall, which is 10 tefachim high. But now there's a nuance. As we learned before, that the same that we say regarding a wall, which is protruding, the same theoretically we say regarding a indentation in the ground. So what happens if you have a ditch? What happens if you have a hole in the ground? You would argue the same logic. If the hole has 10 tefachim depth or more, and by the way, that's what we learned before, well, that's like a wall. Yes and no. Yes, that if it's 10 tefachim, it's significant. Less than 10 tefachim, it's not. If the ditch is deep, 10 tefachim or more, ooh, that's a ditch. But there's a big difference. When there is a wall, I'm speaking practically. If I have a wall that's 10 tefachim, it makes it difficult for me to go from one side to the other. I know I can climb over a wall. I can climb over a wall of 10 amos also with a ladder. But without making that type of effort, it stops me. When you have a ditch, it's easy to go from one side to the ditch, to the other side of the ditch then, if the width of the ditch is narrow. If you have a crack on the sidewalk, it can go down to the depths of the earth. It can go down a mile. What do I care? If it's only an inch, I won't even be afraid. I'll step over it. So the din of 10 tefachim is true. It's whether it's going up, whether it's going down. But when it's going up, we don't care about the width, even if the width is paper thin. The wall separates. When it comes to acharit, says the Mishnah, not only does it have to be amayk asara, but now you have another rule in addition, and that is it has to have the width of at least arba'ah. Okay, not arba. Arba means amis. Remember that? When it's feminine, it's tefachim. It's not the end of the world. But if it's narrower than 4 tefachim, then people will jump over it with such ease that it's not considered a separation. Akan, Mazel Tov, we learned the Mishnah. So we had Korachas HaKerem, we had Mechoil HaKerem, we had actually a Machloikis. What is Mechoil HaKerem? We'll get back to that later. And then we had the Din of a God. Okay, and the Gemara now will begin by going into the first case of the Mishnah of Korachas HaKerem. Says the Gemara, Omar Korachas HaKerem, right? Going back to the words of the Mishnah, Omar Rabbi Yochanan, that Korachas HaKerem, a bald spot in a vineyard, refers specifically to a initial vineyard. There was one vineyard, and in the vineyard there was a clearing. Some of the vines got destroyed. Korachas HaKerem, hu kerem shecharav. Okay, now, one second. Korachas HaKerem, I'm sorry, says Rabbi Yochanan, we are going to have in our dafim and daf, mem dalid, we're going to have another din called a kerem shecharav, a vineyard that was destroyed. And Rabbi Yochanan is not even quoting what the halacha is, but he wants to begin our chapter in the Gemara to make it clear that our case of Korachas HaKerem versus the case that we're going to have later is not exactly the same. How are they different? Korachas HaKerem, our Mishnah's case that we are calling the bald spot in a vineyard, is, as we explained, Makrichen oisoi me'emtsoi. It's where the vines that were cleared out from the middle alone, which will allow for it to be flanked, like we mentioned, by at least two sides with the kerem. When we're going to have later on Daf Mem Dalid the dinim of kerem shecharav, there we are speaking about a scenario. These are the words of the Gemara, that when the vineyard was cleared out, when the vines were uprooted, they were uprooted from all of the outer rows, which means it's not flanked. The open area is not being flanked anymore. More details of that we'll leave to Laf Mem Daled. But what Rabbi Yochanan is saying, and as we're going to build up from Rabbi Yossi now and then from the Braisa, is that you have to, the pictures are amazing. You have a vineyard. Don't forget, guys, that a vineyard, you're going to Daf Mem Daled. Okay, that's fine. I would take away the picture, because without learning that properly, I think people will get confused. I want to speak about what we're learning about over here. And even if you want to show the picture right now, even though we didn't get to there yet, the point is like this, Dan, a couple of rules. The minimum size of a vineyard, lebesilol, and we're only going with besilol, is a minimum of 2 rows. And every row, the truth is, one of the 2 rows can have 2 vines, but one of them has to have 3. So whenever we're going to speak about the width, right, of the rows, we will always refer to the width of a row as 3. Okay? Now, how much space do they take? That we'll learn later, because they could be spaced a lot. And the shiurim that we have in our Mishnah will fit even if a minimum amount of vines were removed. The Shayach, let's go with Beis Hillel, that by the Korachas HaKerem you'll have the 16 amas, as we'll see in a moment. But what we're looking for is that when you remove the middle part of the kerem, at least 2 sides should still have kerem. And Kevin, take a look at them. Whoever has the 35 B2, look inside the picture on the top and look inside the picture on the bottom, the 2 pictures. I don't see it on the Zoom yet, but maybe that's just my machine over here. And what you see is that you had 5 rows planted, right? In the picture on the top, you had 5 rows planted. And again, we're making every row to have 3, even though be'emes, one of the 2 rows only needs to have 2, but it won't help. A vineyard has one of the 2 rows have to have 3. So we will always depict a row of 3. In other words, you cannot make a row in the vineyard of 2, because since one of the 2 rows has to have 3, so we leave it at 6, even though really you don't need to have 6, which is 3 and 3. Really 3 and 2 would be enough, but one of the 2 has to be 3. So take a look at the picture. The top picture would be a great example where you have our Mishnah's case of Korachas HaKerem. Someone planted a vineyard, and they planted a vineyard of 5 rows. I'm going to go into numbers. And every row was comprised of 3 vines. That was a vineyard. Here, if for whatever reason, row number 3 was uprooted, row number 3 vines were removed. Now you have a clearing in the vineyard. you still have, I'm going to call the top the north. That's the way Lahabdul the Goyim do it, and the bottom the south. That's what you can see, that even if there's nothing planted to the east and the west, to the right and to the left, even if there was nothing there, why is there nothing there? Because if all you had then was 3 rows, if you uprooted row number 3 and you uprooted all 3, there's nothing to the right and to the left. But you have now that area where 3 is flanked by halachic vineyards. And that's in contrast to diagram B, Kevin, if you can focus down, that if a person from the outset only planted 3 rows, and this is a vineyard, because you're kidding? You only need to have really 5, 3, and 2. Here you have 9 vines, and they are configured in 3 rows. So you had a vineyard. If you uprooted the middle row, in this case of the small vineyard, picture the line number 2, what do you have left now? Now it's not flanked by any halachic vineyard. It's flanked by vines, but it's not flanked by a vineyard. So first of all, Rabbi Yochanan, with the picture that you showed, Kevin, we'll get to on Daf Mem Daled. Korachas HaKerem means diagram A. It means that even though you made a bald spot in the middle of the vineyard, you still have vineyard. Look on the top or look on the bottom, and you have a real vineyard. And let's go further. Amar Rabbi Yossi, let's read the words. What is the case of the Mishnah that's so chamor that it's not enough for you just to leave the 4 amas? You must have begun from a much larger vineyard. For you to be able to make an opening, a clearing, a uprooting of vines, and for you still to have a flanking of both sides, it has to be minimum, like we said, 5 rows. You got it, Rabbi Mendel? And now you have a vineyard from both sides. But if you only lechatchila had a small vineyard will be defined here as 3 rows. So yeah, even in other words, of course, a small vineyard can be also 2 rows. But we're trying to give you a scenario where you uproot the middle, even though physically it's flanked by both sides, but it's not flanked halachically by both sides. Because the top you only have a row, and the bottom you only have a row. That's called karachas hakerem. And in such a case, guys, you don't need to have 16 amas. That means in diagram B, if someone wants to plant wherever row 2 was, if you want to plant over there wheat or whatever you want to plant, I only need to know one thing. If what I'm planting then is beyond 4 amas from row number 1, and it's beyond 4 amas from row number 3, I'm good to go. That's the general rule. It's not a kli hakerem. There's no taroivis. There's no mixture. It's 4 amas away. If you don't have, so you have to have 8 amas, but you don't need to have 16 amas. You get it? Good. Now, the Gemara is going to bring a braisa that will back up what Rabbi Yossi said. Utanin, and then as we learned in a braisa, and the braisa is going to mention 4 scenarios. That you know what's korachas hakerem in contrast to kerem shecharav. Again, it has to be flanked by minimally 2 sides with a halachic kerem. It's simple. Kerem shecharav memtsoy, you have a kerem, and now it was destroyed. It was cleared out from the middle. Then the shtayr by at least kedei kerem, and what remained was enough vines configured in enough rows for that to be considered the kerem. Now, whether you're going to have that remaining vineyards me'arba ruchais, whether you only have it from 3 ruchais, whether even you only have it it's not perpendicular, dafka not, but it's from both sides. As long as you have a kerem from at least 2 sides, that is where you have to be machmer, which is the din of our Mishnah, whether it's like Beis Hillel, whether it's like Beis Shammai. It's not enough to have the 4 amas. Right? Let's go to Beis Hillel. You have to have 4 and another 8. Total of 16. So the Braisa gave where it's flanked from 4 sides, from 3 sides, and from 2 sides. So I would like to begin. I know it's next year, and it's exciting. If you take a look on Daf Lamed Vav, this is the Gemara's explaining of the 4 cases of the Braisa. You're going to see inside the Rash Sirilio, and it's Mamish La Yehuda Moisa Oida. We're going to learn it with the Marafulda, which are the pictures that were drawn primarily. I'm sorry, take it back. The Marav Fulda's explanation, if you have the art school 36A1, is all the way in the bottom. In the because there's another girsa. But let's just begin. There's so much to speak about, and let's begin. But Kevin, if you can zoom out, and I want people to see when they look at the zoom, also the picture on the bottom. Okay. So unlike the examples that we were using on Daf Lamed Hey Amid Beis, where you planted from the outset a row of 3, in order for it to be possible, Rabbi Mendel, for you to have a clearing flanked from all 4 sides, there's one chap over here. And look in diagram B. That's the most important chap. Or in the bottom, same thing. That picture is perfect, Kevin. What is that? No. Yeah. That when you take out the middle, right? So we're going to have rows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we mentioned you have to have 5 rows for you to be able to take out row number 3, and you're still going to have 2 rows on the top and 2 rows on the bottom. For me to be able to have rows from all 4 sides, which is the first case of the Braisa, you have to have, and see, let's use the directions. Top is north, just to speak the same language. The bottom is south. This is the way the Goyim do it. I'll make it clear that Yidden, we put east to the top, but east is to the right and south, and west is to the left. See, west is not left. You see, all of this is wrong. Left is Gevura. Left is west is Yesoid. West is the Shechina. Okay, but coming back over here. So if you take a look at diagram B, and you're going to see that if someone removed from row 3, not A, B, C, D, E, F, G. No, not that. Only C, D, and E. And Mendel, we're always going to be speaking about someone removing 3 vines, because 3 vines is the minimum size of a row. So you remove the row, you move 3. That's the way. It could be much more, but this is the minimum size. What happens when you remove, if you have to take a step back, Ava, because I can't see the numbers. It was good the way it was before. When you remove 3C and 3D and 3E, the gap in the middle, not the smaller gaps that he designed that will go, God willing, next year and explain, these are words in the Gemara. Or even better, if you look in the bottom, in the bottom of the art scroll, you don't have these little gaps. Okay? What we're looking for is that on each side of the clearing, there should be 2 rows of vines. But how are they configured? So when you're looking at the west and you're looking at the east, the perspective is you stand, put your brain in the gap, and face the west. The 2 rows will be on top of you. Point is that no matter which direction you are facing, you're going to have 2 rows. Do I need for the rows to be 5? No, I don't need them. But that's the case that he designed over here for you to be able to have from all 4 sides a kerem. So let's just read those words. Chavida. How do you do it? So there's 2 versions in the Gemara, either Chamesh or Sheva, which is hugely different. Which will be the difference between the bottom picture and the picture that we have in the bulk over here. And we're going to go with the Gersa Chamesh. So Chamesh should, and if you only have 5 rows, not 7 rows. Min Shoiva, which would mean that each one is comprised of 7. That's A, B, C, D, E, F, G. If Nosaf Chad Karmin, if you took out 1 vineyard, the Gemara is calling 1 vineyard 3, a row of 3, even though Be'emes, a vineyard is 3 and 2. Doesn't matter, but that's how it works. You took out a row, if that's the picture in the middle. In other words, in diagram A, what did you remove? From row 3, you removed C, D, and E. Now, what happens? Ki is arba kedamim. What do you have? That's diagram B. You have 4 kedamim. You get it? You have in the north 2 rows. You have in the south 2 rows. You have in the east 2 rows. You have in the west 2 rows. These are the tricky words. And uselasa ben noyon. And you have 3 gaps. Why are we saying 3 gaps? So look inside diagram B. Even though you did not remove anything other than 3 C, D, and E, we are viewing it that in C, D, and E, you're going to have a row on the top. There are gaps between every row. But the gap between 1 and 2 is the normal size gap. That doesn't halachically separate rows 1 and 2. The gap that's always there, the space that's in between 4 and 5 is the normal size gap. What is the korachas? The middle gap. The middle gap is already much bigger. The middle gap separates the rows 1 and 2 and rows 4 and 5. And as regarding the middle gap that the Mishnah is speaking about, Yerushalmi, you have to have 16 amas. And we'll stop over here, and to be continued. So those of us that were so excited that we finished the third chapter,